turned it off. One thing to do. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I have this running. This is an interesting. This is where we're headed. This is a 3D depiction of the temple that was a free download from a place called Bible-scenes.com, and it was nice that they had this. Now, I don't know how accurate the contrasts are and the actual brightness of everything that you see inside. I think the idea behind the way that this person wanted to depict the temple was that it was really bright and shiny, and that it emulated all this light. And so I wanted to just give an idea of where we're headed with this. This is what Solomon is tasked with building, and we're going to talk about the amount of labor that goes into it and all the things that had to be managed before they can get it put together. This is a big building project. So I just wanted to run this by. I mean, we can see the grandness of it, the beauty of it, and there's a lot of visual. I hope my voice doesn't go because I have to do this and then I need to preach today, so I hope. There's a lot of visual effects of this. This is a very visual thing that Solomon is tasked to do. We see the showbread and the lampstands and all of that. So I just wanted to kind of run that through really quick, before we started, just to see the task that Solomon is taking on. Okay, we are in the book of 1 Kings. And we are in chapter 5. 1 Kings chapter 5, if you want to turn there. We are also going to touch on Chronicles. Before we get into that, we're going to touch on Chronicles because they're both related. And it brings a little more depth to the story. We're not just talking about just Solomon and what he did, but there's a lot that was going on before Solomon got the work. Solomon was instituted as king instead of David. Some versions will read in place of David, but David was still alive when Solomon became king. And so I think the wording instead of David is more appropriate. So my point is that David was still around. And so David, as much as he wanted to build the temple, was told he couldn't. And so, excuse me. So he decided to at least get things together for the building of the temple. And we'll see what Solomon had access to, whether it be the actual materials or whether it was an agreement that David had paved the way for, so Solomon could just walk into it. It isn't real clear about that, but some of it says that he already amassed this stuff. And if you're ever in the construction industry, having it could mean just it's part of the contract. And, just if it's part of the agreement, it's part of the building already. So that's very well what a lot of this stuff could mean. So before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Gracious Holy Father, we're so thankful, Lord, for this beautiful day you've given to us, that we could be together as your church and study from the word that you have given to us and charged us to keep. We hope and pray that all things we do would be in accordance with your will. In Christ's most holy name, amen. Okay, before we get into 1 Kings chapter 5, Solomon is now the king. He has peace on all sides, and he's going to start the building of the temple. And first thing he needs to do is get the stuff, right? So in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, I'm going to just kind of hash over it very quickly. David said, "This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of the burnt offering for Israel." So David gave orders to gather the foreigners who were in the land of Israel, and he set stone cutters to hew out stones to build the house of God. David prepared large quantities of iron to make the nails for the doors and the gates and the clamps, and more bronze than could be weighed. So this is David's part. And timbers of cedar, logs beyond number for the Sidonians and the Tyrians brought large quantities of cedar timber to David. David said, "My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house that is built for the Lord shall be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout all the lands. Therefore now I will make preparations for it." So David made temple preparations before his death. Okay, so this is David doing his part. And so when we're reading chapter 5, there may be an implication that either it could have been while David was still alive, although I don't think he was. But David sets all these things into motion, and that is very important to remember all of this, that this is basically a project manager. Solomon is very wise. He's the project manager doing all this stuff. Now, just to get an idea, in verse 14 it says, "Behold, with great pains I have prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver, and bronze and iron beyond weight, for they are in great quantity. Also timber and stone I have prepared, and you may add to them." So he also tells Solomon, he tasks Solomon with doing this. And he says, here's everything you have to work with. And I have no doubt that he also talked about who he should be dealing with. And so one of the things that Barry Kirchville wanted to look at was Second Chronicles chapter 2. Second Chronicles chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Solomon numbered all the aliens who were in the land of Israel, following the census, which his father David had taken, and 153,600 were found. He appointed 70,000 of them to carry loads, and 80,000 to quarry stones in the mountains, and 3,600 supervisors to make the people work. Okay, so there's our big number of people working on this project, and that was one of the reasons why I was showing those images. When you look at that, when you looked at the image, you see these stones, and you're thinking, why 156,000 people? That's a lot of people. Well, we look at things today, and we have machines that take the place of 100 men. You have a train that pulls things over somewhere. They have great capabilities. It would take thousands of men to do something like that. So, living in today's day and age, where we have this industrial, we're a couple of hundred years into this industrial age and technology age, especially even now, where labor is not as bad as it used to be. It takes less people, and you can get more done. And so I'm just trying to take us back to the time of when this happened. It just took a lot of people to do this. So let's read chapter 5. Really quick. We're going to see that Solomon contacts Hiram. Solomon himself. Now, obviously David has already done that, but Solomon does this. He asks for the resources to build the temple. He asks for the lumber, and then Solomon supplies food to him. And this was a covenant agreement. There are 30,000 laborers that are conscripted for the work. Now, this is over and above those numbers I was just reading of the aliens. And those were more likely Jews. We talked about that tax that was on the people, and we talked about how this expansion of wealth was a great burden, ended up being a great burden to the population, because people had to give up their sons for a time to go work. And in some cases, and for the aliens, they had to go work for a month, and then they would take 2 months off. And anyway, and we'll go through that. And this whole process takes like 7 years. Okay, so now Hiram the king, verse 1 of chapter 5. He sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had appointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend of David. Now, this is the New American Standard. I think most other versions say Hiram loved David. Then Solomon sent word to Hiram, saying, "You know that David, my father, was unable to build a house for the name of the Lord, his God, because of the wars which surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. Behold, I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke to David my father, saying, Your son, whom I will set on your throne, in your place will build the house for my name. Now therefore command that they cut for me cedars from Lebanon, and my servants will be your servants. And I will give you wages for your servants, according to all that you say, for you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." When Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, "Blessed be the Lord today, who has given to David a wise son over his great people." And that's exceptional that a king would know Jehovah God. We see that happen later in the time of Daniel and that sort of thing. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, saying, "I have heard the message which you have sent me. I will do what you desire concerning the cedar and cypress timber. My servants will bring them down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will make them into rafts to go by sea to the place where you direct me, and I will have them broken up there, and you shall carry them. Then you shall accomplish my desire by giving food to my household." So Hiram gave Solomon as much as he desired of the cedar and cypress timber. Solomon then gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20 cores of beaten oil. Thus Solomon would give Hiram year by year. The Lord gave wisdom to Solomon, just as he had promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a covenant. Now King Solomon levied forced laborers from all Israel, and the forced laborers numbered 30,000 men. He sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month, in relays that were in Lebanon a month and 2 months at home. Oh, this is for the Jewish conscripted people. And Adoniram was over the forced laborers. Now Solomon had 70,000 transporters, 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountains. And these are the aliens that were forced to work. Besides Solomon's 3,300 chief deputies who were over the project and who ruled over the people who were doing the work. So that's that. There's that number. Then the king commanded, and Hiram's builders and the Gibeonites cut them and prepared the timbers and the stones to build the house. So this is a very simple chapter of this era. They're getting ready to build this, the temple. And it really is a big deal. I think by today's standards, we see high rises, and I mean, just look at Dubai or anything like that, and it's amazing, or New York or Chicago, and those buildings are spectacular. So you might look at that, and this is why I was trying to iterate how much labor it took to do things back then. They didn't have trucks. So the question is, Why was Hiram so happy to provide cedars to help Solomon build the temple? Pretty simple. Aaron, Gary, and then Betty.
We don't really know exactly why. It looks like, we know David wanted to build the temple for the Lord. And, apparently, Hiram wanted to help David because of the affection that he had for him in accomplishing that, and was not able to. And so he's grateful that he's able to help his son. Just,
Okay.
because of the relationship he had with David. But
I like that word affection. I think that is more appropriate than friendship that you find here, because when you look at the word, it says he really loved him. He loved David greatly, and that's exactly what it means. It's this great affection that he has for him. Gary?
Yeah, it just seemed to work out because of his affection for David, but also he benefited economically from doing that, of course, because Solomon sent him what he wanted. It's like business today. Inter-countries, it's a win-win situation is what you want. But I also wanted to mention real quick, we haven't gotten to the details of the contents of the temple, but you've already said, when you mentioned skyscrapers and all that, this would have cost billions of dollars in today's money.
Yeah. I think in 1924, somebody estimated 30 million. I think that's way undervalued when you consider the amount of just the gold that was in there, and then all of the people that were, I mean, David, maybe, the payment for those people were sustenance, but essentially it was basically a tax that they had to go work there. It was a tax against them. Betty, and then Jeff.
Just the same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
He loved David.
He really loved David, and I think this really, for me, it opens up a big question. Not a question so much as there's a revelation, I think. When did David grow this great relationship with Hiram, who's so powerful? He lives on the coast, right? Tyre becomes this great place, and then there's the entire falls eventually. But when did David do that? No, we don't know. There's no story about David going to Tyre and fostering this great relationship, but that's what David did. And there's a lot of things that we don't know about David that were done behind the scenes. And for me, that's all that says to me, is David must have been I think the fact that he killed Goliath helped him emulate, or at least project, that he loved God, and he always gives the credit to God. And I think this really helped sway people's hearts. And what does that say? That is how we sway people's hearts. Jeff, what did you have to say?
Yeah, I'm going to get ahead of it a little bit.
That's okay.
But this gathering of the stones and the timbers and stuff like that, was not just gathering little materials. Whenever they were cut and stuff, they were cut in the field or out in the place and sent back, so that they just had to assemble.
Right.
Because there was no tools or whatever, axe or.
Right.
They didn't have to chisel off a little bit of stone or something like that, or a little bit of the wood or whatever when they were building. They had this stuff prepared and then came in already. So it took a lot of preparation away.
That's interesting. You can't do that when you pour concrete. But, I worked in construction for a while, and in the beginning stages, when we were a young company, we would get all these parts, we'd take everything out to the job site, we would cut it all up, and then we'd measure the glass, and we'd we'd get a big shipment of glass to the job site, and we'd carry it up to the wherever, we'd take it up to the scaffold and shoot it up there with a reach fork or whatever. We would do all these things on site. This is just exactly what you're saying. And there's a lot of wisdom, and this is what we grew into as time went by, and we got better machinery. We have more forethought into our jobs because we got more people up top to manage these projects. And what we started doing was, why don't we just build these windows, storefronts, or giant curtain walls in sections and just take them out to the job site already done? And what it did, it removed risk. It removed the risk of making mistakes. Everything had to be pre-planned as far as sizes and everything, and that's already a thing that happens anyway. But it really mitigated any issues that could happen in the field. Now, there are always issues that are going to happen in the field. But as you can see, the temple is not a complicated building. It's pretty much a rectangle, but there are layers to it. So that's a good note. This is an efficiency thing. And these people who are made to go work in the mountain, wherever it was likely limestone. And we'll talk about some of that. So we've already talked about who these people are. We read 2 Chronicles. A lot of these people were the aliens in the land, and they were told, look, work, however that worked. And so the only reason I bring that up is because these are the people in the land. There are these 30,000 people who are also working on the timber with Hiram on top of everybody else. They're being conscripted to go. It's the draft. It's not a war draft. It's a peacetime draft to build up infrastructure, build back better. Anyway, sorry. So just a note, a core was around 60 gallons, and I'm just trying to make a visual of what 60 gallons were. So if the payment for this was 20,000 cores of wheat, it was 1,200,000 gallons of wheat. So we have to consider, just to deliver the payment for this would take hundreds, if not thousands of people and animals to get that payment to Hiram, as well as whatever they had to do to sustain people in the field. Okay, any questions or comments or observations about this part? Yes, Tom?
Well, I was just thinking about the size of the labor force, you have 150,000 people. Those people have to be fed.
They have to be fed.
You know, we're talking about like 1.2 million gallons of wheat that he just sent as payment.
As payment.
And that's just to pay for the seeders. Think about all the food he had to prepare for the workforce. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It kind of has this sense of like the scale of Egypt, you know, when they built the pyramids. It's that kind
Yes.
of
Yes. And so if you're the farmer growing the wheat and you see this official riding up on his donkey or whatever, and he's going to bring you a message, and it's, half of this wheat or whatever it was has to go to the king. That's the way it worked. Now, could they not do this? Could they not give up half of it? They could. And I guess my point here is God made it that they could produce all this. This is God's doing. And I think it's interesting that God is not only allowing this, but he's helping it. The fact that is an interesting thing, and we're going to get to some of those questions. This level, this measure of faith in God, he attributes whatever David's doing to his God. So this is the way they looked at things back then. They all had their own gods. But, you know, even, like I said, I say every time, Nebuchadnezzar even does this kind of thing. But it's not like he's converted. Doesn't mean that he has that kind of faith. Okay. The Gibeonites were part of the land left to be conquered in God's charge to Joshua and Israel. Here, and still very idolatrous people who are doing a lot of this work. And they're still intact as a nation. They were supposed to be overthrown, but they weren't. So, but God's using them anyway. And I just want to throw that in there because, you know, we like to think that everything was, you know, that God does is with cleanliness, with things that are clean and not with sin. Well, at this point, he's like, well, yeah, those people are sinful, but I'm going to use them. And he uses them, you know, for this visual glory for him. Okay, anything else? Yes.
Just real quick, I couldn't help but think when Hiram gives God credit, says, "Blessed be the Lord," that's a lot different than what Pharaoh said, where he said, "Who is he that I should listen to him?"
You know, that's a good point. That's an excellent point. Because I was going to actually show the tabernacle, just to show where they started in all this, right? And then show the temple, because it really kind of emulates the tabernacle. It's got this outer court, and then there's the altar and the laver. But, you know, of course, the temple's a lot more elaborate. But it's like here, they came from here, right, where you're talking about, where they're a nobody nation, you know, in the eyes of the world. Oh, who are the Jews? Who are the Hebrews? You know, if it wasn't for the Egyptians, you know, if it wasn't for the Egyptian God, they wouldn't have anything. That's the way the world was probably looking at it. You know, the Hebrews understood differently. But here they are now, and God is being glorified to a degree, right? I don't think anybody, like I say, I don't think anybody was converted to become a Hebrew necessarily, but God is being glorified. And I think after this, God has glory after this because of what he was able to achieve with a people. Okay, anything else? Sue?
I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but I thought it was interesting that Solomon told Hiram that Hiram would set the wages.
Wow. What? Okay.
Just, you know, whatever you think is fair is what we'll pay you. And Hiram could have just gone crazy with that. Doesn't appear that he did. They agreed on it. So, but I just thought it was interesting that he said.
That is interesting. I didn't think about that either. You know, being, like I say, I was in construction for a while. Betty, you would know about this. When you work with a contract, you know, whenever, all the contracts I ever worked with, we always said, we'll do it for this much. That's the way the world works, right, Betty? She, like I say, Betty, I actually worked with a project on Betty a long time ago at one of the hospitals. Sharp, was it Sharp?
No, Alvarado.
Alvarado, okay. Yeah, one of the mirrors fell off the wall. And we had to go in there and fix it. And we had to tell Betty, we'll do it for this much. And so that is an interesting point. He must have known, had great faith in God, I would say first, but also he trusted Hiram enough that Hiram wouldn't gouge him. And even if he did, he just would have done it. Now we're going to get to, we will get eventually to Solomon's gift to Hiram later, and it's an insult to Hiram, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. Hey, you know, you do what you do. And
Yeah, good memory. It was scripts.
what's that?
It was scripts. You have a good memory where you did the work for me.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, there's a few minutes left, so let's get into chapter 6. So chapter 6 is about the construction of the temple. It takes 7 years. And again, in this chapter, God reiterates this covenant with Solomon about this, it's the conditions of the covenant, which is walk in my ways, do my statutes and my judgments, and there's these 3 requirements, and then there's a blessing after. It's the doing and then the blessing. It's the adherence to what God talks about, statutes, that sort of thing. We're going to get into that a little bit. And there's this blessing that God promises him. And I'm going to talk about that today later, so I hope I don't bore everybody too much. But this has never changed. And so many people in the religious world want to change this covenant that God has. Yeah, our covenant with God is not based on the old law. I agree with that. But these things have never changed. Walking in God's statutes, if you're a Christian, you don't have to do that? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so let's read chapter 6. Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. As for the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, its length was 60 cubits, and its width 20 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. The porch in the front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits in length, corresponding to the width of the house, and its depth along the front of the house was 10 cubits, and that was what those images were depicting. Also, for the house he made windows with artistic frames. Against the wall of the house he built stories encompassing the walls of the house around both the nave and the inner sanctuary, which he made side chambers all around. Now he's talking about the holy and then the Holy of Holies in these instances. The lowest story was 5 cubits wide, the middle was 6 cubits wide, and the third was 7 cubits wide. For on the outside he made offsets in the wall of the house all around, in order that beams would not be inserted in the walls of the house. The house, while it was being built, was built of stone prepared at the quarry. And this is where all those people were working. And there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool heard in the house while it was being built. And that's what you were talking about, Jeff. None of that was going to happen. You just brought it in and you set it into place. The doorway for the lowest side chamber was on the right side of the house, and they would go up by winding stairs to the middle story, and from the middle to the third. So he built the house and finished it, and he covered the house with beams and planks of cedar. And he also built the stories against the whole house, each 5 cubits high, and they were fastened to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this house which you are building, if you walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will carry out my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. I will dwell among the sons of Israel. I will not forsake my people, Israel. This is important to see, because this is a lot for one person to have to carry, I think. So Solomon built the house and finished it. Then he built the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the ceiling, he overlaid the walls. On the inside with wood, he overlaid the floor of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits on the rear part of the house with boards of cedar. From the floor to the ceiling, he built them for it on the inside as an inner sanctuary, even as the most holy place. The house, that is the nave, in the front of the inner sanctuary was 40 cubits long. That's about 60 feet, something like that. That's pretty big. There was cedar on the house within, carved in the shape of gourds. Now, this is, for me, I start seeing images and I start thinking about graven images. I can't help but go there. It's like, Catholic Church, oh no, what are we doing? I start thinking these things because that was ingrained in me when I was young. No graven images, and where are you going to worship God, especially. You should have no graven images anyway. And I think I just had a misunderstanding of what that meant, but we'll get into that. There was cedar on the house within, carved in the shape of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar. There were no stones seen. So everything was covered. There's just beautiful imagery of everything. Then he prepared an inner sanctuary within the house in order to place there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. Remember, they're both not together yet. The Ark and the tabernacle is not even together yet. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, 20 cubits in height, and he overlaid it with pure gold. Now, has anybody been to San Simeon? Anybody know what that is? Anybody been there? It's Hearst Castle, I mean. What did you think of it, Carol?
Really opulent.
This is opulent?
It was, but it wasn't like this.
Wasn't like this. We went there. Robin and I went there. And did we bring the kids with us? Boy, I can't even remember that. But I went there, and I thought it was beautiful, and there were some really historical things in there. But I thought, wow, it wasn't as big a deal as I thought it was. It was old. It was decaying. You can see that they were having to maintain it. So that's just, I just want to point to the fact that all of this is just material stuff, okay? The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits in length. Okay, did that. Verse 21, Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. Wow. And he drew chains of gold across the front of the inner sanctuary, and he overlaid it with gold. Now, I'm not trying to downplay this. This is obviously very beautiful and expensive. And yes.
Yeah, and I think it's significant to mention the pure gold aspect of the build in reference to the decay, because we know that gold does not.
It does not. That's right. Absolutely. Well, I think I remembered that there was gold in the tile of the pool or something, or on the grounds, and you were walking on gold, but it wasn't covered in gold. Anyway, so when I think of this and I think of Hearst Castle, I think not even close. I agree with Carol on that. He overlaid the whole house with gold until all the house was finished. Also, the whole altar, which was by the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. Also, in the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood. And this is something that you didn't see in this. Each 10 cubits high. So that's 15-foot cherubim in the inner sanctuary. 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the end of the one wing to the end of the other wing were 10 cubits. So this thing's huge in this room. And this is where the ark is going to go. The other cherub was 10 cubits. Both the cherubim were of the same measure and of the same form. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, so this is a 15-foot tall thing. So was the other. He placed the cherubim in the midst of the inner house, and the wings of the cherubim was spread out so that the wing of one was touching the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub was touching the other wall. So their wings were touching each other in the center of the house. It's magnificent. He also overlaid the cherubim, these huge things, with gold. Then he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, open flowers or lilies, and outer sanctuaries. He overlaid the floor of the house with gold, and the inner and outer sanctuaries. For the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood, the lintel, and 5-sided doorposts. So he made 2 doors of olive wood, and he carved on them carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold and he spread the gold on the cherubim and on the palm trees. He also made for the entrance of the nave 2-sided doorposts of olive wood. And the 2 doors of cypress wood, the 2 leaves of the one door turned on pivots, and on the 2 leaves of the other door turned on pivots. So he has these nice doors. He carved on it cherubim, palm trees, open flowers, and he overlaid them with gold, evenly applied on the engraved work. He built the inner court with 3 rows of cut stone and a row of cedar beams. And in the 4th year of the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished throughout all its parts according to its plans. So they had plans. They had to. So he was 7 years in building it. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we do this just to get the context of what we're talking about. It really is a great accomplishment. And I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of this, but God sets forth those contingencies again for this covenant. Walk in my statutes, do my judgments, do all my commandments. Now, this is not just for Solomon, right? This is for all Israel, right? If Israel decides they're going to go off, even though Solomon's a good king, they could get into trouble. I'm assuming. So, and of course, at the end of all that, if you do that, there's going to be this great blessing. I will dwell in the midst of the sons of Israel, and shall not forsake my people Israel. So that was what I tried to raise that up a little bit. It was the purpose of the king to follow God. And he promises, if you follow me, Israel will be blessed. So my question or my comment is, describe the weight of responsibility of Solomon and the implications. Not only does it move beyond Solomon, when we consider that the entire nation, its well-being, is riding on his faith. This is a heavy weight, I think. Considering all the effort and wealth that goes into the temple, what is God telling Solomon he wants? And what does he always want even now? We're going to get into that a little bit later today, too. What does God want from Solomon? Does he just want him to build the temple?
Obedience.
Obedience. What does that mean? Walking in his ways, right? It's those, it's this. And only reason I bring this up is because when you get to Jesus, does this change? All of a sudden, Jesus comes, we're under grace, everything's great, we don't have to do anything. We don't earn it ourselves. No, we don't earn it ourselves. So why should I do anything? Is that what we should do? Aaron?
God forbid.
Yes. To quote somebody well-known like Paul, yeah? Paul says, what does he say? He says, if grace abounds, should we go on sinning? God forbid. Yes. That sums it up nicely.
With all this gold and stuff like that, this overlaid in the temple and stuff, you read about was it in Daniel, somewhere, I can't remember, my mind's gone. But when the temple was destroyed, those that saw the rebuilt temple, they knew the glory of the previous temple that Solomon built, stuff. Can you imagine, we're in this place here to worship. Everything around here covered with gold, the world would look at it like, wow, you guys are in a beautiful place, and stuff like that. But, God doesn't need the gold,
He doesn't need to
you
go.
know, to make it glorious, you know, stuff, but the world looks at it like, wow,
Right.
this is a great place. You must have a great God, you know, because it's all that gold and shiny stuff, so.
That was it, wasn't it? It was basically a representation and a signal to everybody else. And from his own people, God was looking to them to do those things. That's what he was looking for. And eventually, you know, the temple, the reason for the temple gets lost on them eventually. So we're going to get into that next week when we get into chapter 7, and we're going to get a lot deeper into that and as to what happens and why. Okay, anything else before we're done? Okay, thank you.